Productivity Commission is conducting a 5-year assessment of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, as you probably know, with a draft report expected in August. Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm chaired the Senate Select Committee, which looked into the implementation of the plan and has made a submission which he's here to tell us about. Senator, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You mentioned in your submission that the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, it was written in a time of panic, but is drought the new normal for us?
No, it's not. We've had 2 very wet years since the Millennium Drought when the plan was prepared. And I mean, the Millennium Drought was really a bad one. It lasted the best part of a decade. And there was a feeling during that by some people, at least, that this was the new normal. But we've seen a return to Australia's typical seasonal patterns since then. So a couple of really wet years, some dry periods, and several normal ones.
So how do you think the plan needs to change to reflect that?
Well, there are a number of aspects that's wrong with the plan, and I'm not arguing with the general proposition that the plan has some positive elements to it, but nobody has really drawn attention to the situation in South Australia, where although the plan is essentially designed to benefit the environment, the plan is in effect propping up an artificial environment, an environment that wasn't created by nature but has been created by humans, and that is the keeping the lower lakes fresh water. That was done during the 1930s, finished in 1940, and what it means is that quite a lot of water that comes down the Murray River flows into the lower lakes, Lake Alexandrina and Lake Albert, evaporates. And that water has been retrieved from irrigation communities and towns and so forth in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. And the fact that it evaporates and therefore it's not used for any productive purpose in South Australia is a matter of some considerable angst to those states. And from their point of view, the question has to be raised, why is it necessary for the lower lakes to remain fresh? What environmental benefits does that bring? Is there any reason why they couldn't be allowed to return to the estuary situation that they were before the barrages were put in? And so that the evaporation, which you can't stop, but it'll occur from Lake Albert and Lake Alexandrina, can be, salt water or a mixture of salt and fresh water.
What do you think would be the benefits there of letting salty water mix with the fresh?
Well, I think, first of all, it would be a return to the more natural environment. I think it's quite artificial to have a barrage, have barrages, and so the sea can't come into an estuary. The Murray is the only river in Australia where we do this. All the other rivers with estuaries, we allow the estuary to operate as a normal estuary. So the sea comes in when the river flow is low, and the river flows out when river flow is high. And that's how nature designed them. The benefits, though, would mean that something like 800 to 900 gigalitres of evaporation in the lower lakes wouldn't be fresh water. So that would potentially be available for environmental and social and economic benefits in the states where it was retrieved before it was sent down the river to the lower lakes. Now, that's an awful lot of water. That is a massive amount of water. So areas that currently don't get a watering plan, and there are a few, towns that have lost out on irrigation water, and that's absolutely devastating effects on them. A few, even in South Australia, have lost their water, but although much, much less than in the other states. The availability of substantial amount of that 800 to 900 gigalitres of water further upstream would be just phenomenal in terms of the impact it would have.
Let's talk about how we'd get there. Your submission to the Productivity Commission mentions Bird Island there at the mouth of Murray. What do you think would happen with that process if it was removed, or how would it go about?
That island only established after 1940 when the barrages went in, because they cut down on the the flow of water in and out of the mouth of the Murray, and as a result, the mouth basically silted up, and that island is a consequence of silting up. So if Bird Island was removed, the mouth of the Murray would be clearer. The water could flow in and out more freely. So, like any other river, and it was, and as it used to be before 1940, when the river flow is low, the sea would come into the lakes. When river flow is high, the water would flow out of the lakes relatively freely. The mouth of the Murray would be open more often, although not all the time. Before 1940, there are good historical records that show the mouth of the Murray did close up from time to time, but it would be open a lot more than it is at the moment. It's hardly open at all, and it's only kept open by excavators. So removal of Bird Island, it's an island that didn't used to exist. It's a sand island. Somebody said it has endangered species on it. I don't think there's any evidence for that. And if there are endangered species on it, they certainly exist in the surrounding area, because that island is not all that old.
The other suggestion that's been made there is regards to the southeast drainage scheme. I believe you suggested redirecting water from it into the Coorong. How would that plan differ?
Well, at the moment there is a southeast drainage scheme which is designed to reduce the salty contamination of pasture and cropping land in the southeast of South Australia. That's quite a major undertaking. And it drains water away from the area so that the land is usable for agriculture, and that water runs directly into the sea, ultimately via a pipe. Now, and it's beneficial for the southeast area. There's no argument about that. But because of the state of the Coorong is just not being flushed enough with enough fresh water, given the changes in the Murray Mouth and the fact that it's closed so much, it's quite stagnant. It's become very stinky and not in very good condition. It's not quite so bad when you get down towards towards the mouth of the Coorong, where it gets a little bit of water refreshing, but it just doesn't get enough to carry all the way up to the other end of it, and it's really quite putrid down that end. And so it would not be a massive exercise to redirect that pipe that currently takes the water from the salt removal process and run it into the Coorong. So it would still be salty water, but it wouldn't be hugely saline, and it would refresh the Coorong with some additional water that's not currently getting, and would hopefully, I think, and the evidence to our committee, which I chaired, was that would have a substantially positive effect on the overall health of the Coorong.
What about the cities upstream? Do you think this would affect them at all?
Yes, well, that is an issue, and you're right to raise that. The reason the barrages went in the first place to keep the sea from coming in was because in a dry year, without them, there would be a risk, if the mouth of the Murray was open, that salty water would come upstream right a considerable way up the Murray. I understand there was history where that did occur. Now, that, of course, would be a risk to Adelaide's water supply and also to the irrigation offtakes for the riverlands and other areas that use irrigation water in South Australia. So at the same time that you remove the barrages to allow the river in and to mouth of the Murray to open so the river can flow in and out, you would need to erect a lock, a weir, something at around about Wellington, so that in a dry year, if there is seawater coming in the mouth, it can't go any further upstream than around about Wellington. The committee that I chaired had engineers comment on that, and they said that that's technically feasible, and they're not hugely expensive, those things, although obviously you don't get it done for pin money. But that would be necessary. Most years it wouldn't be needed, but in occasional dry years you wouldn't want the possibility that seawater would contaminate Adelaide's water or the South Australian irrigation supply. What
are the concerns, if any, that people have raised with you?
The main objections seem to be resistance to change. I find South Australians and my colleagues in the Senate often don't actually quite understand all the details that I've just been talking about. There is just this attitude that the more water we get, the better off we are, and no, don't change anything, because as long as we get more water, there is nothing to see here. It's all good. In fact, they're wrong. And the Coorong, it is not in very good shape at all. It is, as I said, stinky and stagnant and suffering quite badly. Lake Albert, I don't think there's any way to save it, but it's silting up, becoming quite shallow, and probably give it 50 or 100 years, it won't even exist anymore. So you can't just say nothing to see here. There does need to be some consideration given to how things are going. But the other thing is, Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales have paid an enormous price for implementing the Murray-Darling. Now, I think most of the people affected by it would say, well, look, if it's going to a good cause, all right, we'll have to suck it up. But when they see 800 or 900 gigalitres of year evaporating from Lake Alexandrina and Lake Albert, just to keep a lake fresh when it wouldn't be fresh in the natural environment, then they sort of raise their eyebrows and go, excuse me, why are we doing this again? Are we doing this for the benefit of the environment, or is there some other agenda involved? And I think they're quite unhappy about it. But of course, South Australians have been told over and over again, the eastern states are stealing our water. They're not allowed to steal our water, and it doesn't get much more complex than that for many of them.
Does indeed. Well, Senator David Leyonhjelm is chairing the Senate Select Committee looking into the implementation of this plan, and we thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
ABC Radio across regional South Australia and in the far west of New South Wales there too. What do you think? 0467 922 783.